is just to invite you to share keywords. It can be a single word or a phrase or something that you have in your own reflection gathered. First, let's start with something that you might do at a personal level. If there has been something particularly remarkable about this week. Please, Marty.
I think I was impressed by the idea that people are more important than things. And when things are made more important than people, and we will pay a price for that.
I need to share with my students the story of rooftop gardens in Hong Kong. They will be inspired, and it will be the single greatest way to pique their imagination about this.
Thank you.
It's rather more prosaic. I just like the opportunity to catch up with where people are. All right, see people again. It's a great social occasion.
Words have been mentioned frequently, in my hearing at least, have been solidarity, and I think that there is a sense at which just the chance to be together creates that affirmation that we're not alone in thinking along these lines and that there are other people that we can call upon. Anyone else? Brilliant.
So, brilliant to hear Rob and Colleen talking about the school's work. Absolutely fascinating. A success story from Doncaster. As a Yorkshireman, absolutely thrilled. You don't hear so many. And I think the very striking question coming out of that is the interface between culture and relationships, which for those of us in the peace building group was talking about with respect to Sudan, because Rob is measuring relationships, but his whole discussion was one of culture. And so there's a chicken and egg question. Does the culture of the school determine the relationships, or do the relationships determine the culture? And I think that there are some questions around that which could kind of shape some kind of future thinking in terms of how we affect change and the kind of change we want to affect.
I found the ideas fascinating. I'm new to this kind of forum. I found the ideas really interesting. But I feel the sense, right, we need to do something. And that's my takeaway, is to think hard about what we actually do so that improving relationships for ordinary people, wherever they may be, actually happens.
I'd certainly like to pick up on that one. Sorry, someone was wanting to respond from me to have their voice. If I could just respond on this question of sense of, I don't want to use Michael's word, but there's a sense of kairos, chronos, there's a sense of timing at the moment. But the thing that has come through for me is the reminder of human agency and gifted human agency, that the collective of expertise, intelligence, emotional intelligence, as well as technical or financial intelligence in this room is a gift, and it's a gift which is meant to be used for purpose. And so I do think that there is something about the takeaways for me. I had two. One was around the messaging. Frequently, we were able to share and catch up on some fabulous things that are going on, but we seem not quite to have the communication piece. And whether that's about strategizing or messaging or targeting, I'm not sure, but there's no shortage of evidence that what we're doing is heading in the right direction and is actually producing measurable results. So maybe the challenge for the next 12 months for me is around this communication issue, where, how, to whom, what, and for us to spend a little bit of time, perhaps in our individual pursuits, professionally and otherwise, but then also on behalf of the movement as a whole, when we go back home, how do we keep this going in ways that are more effective? And the second takeaway for me was around the psychological shift from a sense of being overwhelmed by the complexity of the problems that we're facing, and this unacknowledged sense of inevitability. That this crisis is unavoidable because that's human nature and we're too slow to respond and we don't prevent, we have to wait, and then we think, oh my goodness, let's not let that happen again. In fact, we've let it happen again already several times, but we seem just to be sliding. So there's something about the call to proactivity, and the counterbalance to that for me was about being available. The other day, at a meeting in Michael's home, and it's a message that had come to me on another occasion, was about a quote actually from the New Testament, "Be ye not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewal of your mind." So it does start with us, that if we are locked into and captured by current systems and ways of thinking, then so much of what we've been discussing here will remain just a discussion. That there's some kind of sense of not only proactivity as an individual and in the work that I do, but a sense of being available to everybody in this room, to be part of growing that community. Somebody had talked about solidarity, the sense of not being alone and just being able to catch up. Is there anyone else, before we turn to our eminent panel here of responders, anyone else with a takeaway at a personal level? Please, Julian.
So I guess I just wanted to reflect a discussion that came out of reflect a discussion that came out of lunchtime and comment from Prabhu about joining the social media revolution in terms of the way that we get the message out and start to structure our ideas into much smaller, more self-contained bites, whether that's items of good news or development of the ideas or including different constituencies. That starts with all of us starting to contribute to the social media environment, the social media world, the ideas that we have and relating with our friends and contacts, to get to broaden the reach and to test in a much more a less intellectually rarefied atmosphere the ideas of relational thinking, so that they stick at ground level. I'm trying to think through, well, how can I do that? What does that mean for me? That's perhaps my challenge.
All of us in our own space obviously can think through what this means in our daily work, in our families, in our communities and so on. But I'd like now to turn to our respondents who've been given extraordinary level of present preparation and guidance on how they should respond in this section. And I'm going to start with Tim. Tim, to ask if you wouldn't mind giving us a lead. Then we might go to Jonathan. Then perhaps to Robert and Gabriella, and we'll ask Michael to make some closing comments. Tim.
The issue that Brendan raises about that's coming out of the relational schools work, about the relationship between relationships and culture, is one that anthropologists and lots of other people have talked about for years. The germs of culture can sit on an artifact, on something. They can sit in a book, they can sit in this. We sort of know what these are and they have cultural meaning. But culture only gets transmitted, the germs of culture only really get transmitted, become infectious, active in relationships. If you want to change the culture of a bank, It is the active culture that you want to change, not merely its historical culture. You don't change the history books to change their culture. You change the relationships in a bank to change the culture. The active culture is transmitted in relationships. So if you want to change the way your organisation works, the culture in your organisation, the culture in your community, then you must change the relationships. And it is those relationships that will transmit repeatedly the germs for good or ill. The positive bacteria that keeps you healthy, or the bacteria that is going to kill you. So our question is whether we are active and putting active positive germs of culture and transmitting them in our relationships and our relationships between organisations, so that we have a culture in the prisons, in the schools, in the banks that is healthy and encouraging the relationships. But it's the relationships that will transmit that.
Thank you.
I'm not sure I'm going to say anything as profound as that. Just a couple of thoughts. First of all, both my daughters are teachers. One's a primary school teacher in Cambridge, the other is a teacher in a big state school in Parsons Green in London. And what they say, or particularly the one who teaches here, because she's had her whole career in teaching, is that the culture comes from the top, the headmaster or the headmistress. So I think we can talk about which comes first, chicken or egg. But if you haven't got it right in the leadership, then it's not going to be right within the organisation. And I'm absolutely certain that applies in the world that I come from, the business world. It has to be driven from the top, the standards, the whole ethical approach, the whole relational approach. But coming on to the area that I was talking about, and taking up the discussion we had at lunchtime, there are so many people competing in the area about changing company culture. We were talking about whether it's possible to get people together. Well, I think practically it's extremely difficult because everybody's got their own little patch. We talk to politicians, we talk to others who are involved in this area and try to change corporate practice. But I think that comes from not only talking about business leaders, but also trying to get it from the bottom up through consumers and shareholders. And I think particularly, this is where this group is, I'm afraid, inevitably fairly narrow in society, because people don't hear what we're up to. We've had this every year, and it's wonderful to hear people from other countries, and it's fantastic to talk to everyone and meet people, new people, and people I know well over the years. But somehow we've got to raise the profile of the relational approach and what that means. Because I've explained to people endlessly, and people think, well, what do you mean relationships? What do you mean relationships? A physical relationship or a family relationship? But maybe taking the point you raised about Twitter, a blog, something that people could, through social media, could raise the profile and explain it and comment on activities, because every day something happens, even in just in the corporate world. And I say to my wife, that's a relationship, but in family terms, it's a relationship. And if we could have a central body that people could feed ideas in, and then that could be developed into a blog, and then perhaps getting more in the press about this. There's not enough in the press and the media generally. That's, I think, the takeaway we've had before from here.
Just on that point, I remember 2 years ago now how we talked then rather ambitiously about the relational thinking network and how it was going to provide all of these services. And of course it didn't work out, and for understandable reasons. But I'm reminded to say that this enhanced communication that we all want isn't going to happen without the inputs from people who are actually working in this space. And it also shouldn't be limited to something that appears on a relational website, because the infusion in our other lines of communication, I'm thinking LinkedIn and some of these other places where we can be inserting a relational message. I know many of you already do it, but I think it is perhaps something that we need to, as the urgency increases, that we need to really wrestle with as a theme this year. Can you
I really want to respond there, because if we are going to engage lots of other people, if lots of other people are going to be thinking relationally, that isn't that they are going to be, so if we've got the B corporations or the other people that are trying to see good things happen, if they're going to start thinking relationally, then it isn't necessarily that they're going to buy our brand. They are going to start thinking relationally. Relationships are going to be core to how you do ethical business. Not they are going to be joining the movement, they are going to be the movement. They will be saying, I really need to have a for-benefit business, and that means relationships are inside it. I really need to see a really healthy justice system in South Africa. That means we've got to pay attention to the relationships, not we've got to join the relational thinking movement, and it's got to be relationships that they're thinking about relationships inside everything, not they're signing up to a brand.
I think that's really helpful. Thank you very much. I'm going to move now to Robert.
Yes, thank you.
Who's also had lots of time to prepare for this.
It was a sense of protocol that we came as quite a big delegation from South Africa, and I think the sentiment was that it was appropriate to come and honour those of you in the room that have given quite a large part of your lives to try and build towards the common good. And I think that we have a sense of appreciation and value for what was done, especially in pre-1994. And just after that, with bringing our country into a place of peace. And as we now struggle with how to keep that and maintain democracy and close the inequality gap and deal with justice, I think that we are quite grateful that we continue to have an international family and community of thinkers and relational practitioners. So yes, we're very grateful, and to say thank you to all of you for contributing and sharing your vocation and your calling and your purpose, and to give generously. I know that great things often come with sacrifice, and the sacrifice is not always known, and there's been a lot of sacrifice in this room to try and bring about change. And sometimes that change seems elusive and very vulnerable, and you actually wonder whether it was worthwhile. But I'm leaving Cambridge with a sense that it is worthwhile, and as we continue to fellowship, I think that we will find that we will inspire each other to continue. I do think that relational, and we manage stakeholder engagement through relational proximity and interest through diplomacy. What really, and the next big part of the conversation is about leadership. And it's not possible to talk about leadership without speaking about sacrifice. And I think that is where vocation and calling is quite important. And the discussion this afternoon about the value in time and how time impacts relational thinking is quite critical. And so there's so much innovation, so much new ideas. We're going to go back, I think, and have to take time to reflect. But it's been a great privilege to be here, and I have essentially had a long way to go. But perhaps by belonging to a community, which is really what is the heart of your ethos, I think that we've got a better chance of achieving that which we were purposed to achieve.
It's always dangerous to choose people to join a set of respondents or panelists, and I suddenly realised that we, in our geographic representation, neglected to include our colleagues from East Asia. So I'm just putting Moses and Andrew on notice that we'll go next to Gabriella to hear from her perspective. It's been wonderful to have you with us, Gabriella, but then to ask our colleagues from East Asia if they wouldn't mind contributing just a few words as well, and then we'll hand to Michael to close the day.
Maybe they can come sit.
Well, if one would like to come down, perhaps that would be... While they're discussing the possibility, I'll know more. You have Gabriela.
I was thinking, what can I say to this amazing group of people, which I can just say that it's for me such amazing privilege to be here. I just would like to continue to what you said about the communication. I think I am, me personally, I am exactly a very concrete product of your communication. Because actually I'm, let's say, young professional who just in some, let's say, gas way got engaged to this amazing ideas about the Jubilee and the relational thinking. And for me now, let's say maybe from the perspective of a young generation, it was like, wow, this is the answer. And I was and I remember how I was reading like 3 times, 4 times all the books from the Jubilee Center, all the papers. I was like, wow, this is it. This is the answer for all the questions which I was giving to me through years. And so I just would like to say thank you to all of you who have been working for years and developing all of these amazing ideas. That for me as a representative of the young generation, it means so much that we have something what we can just learn and then trying to spread and maybe really develop in the next decades. So really it's such amazing honor for me to be able to see you and to see how you are thinking and what is behind all your thoughts. And when it comes to the communication, then maybe I think that it's like 2 ways. One thing is that we as a young generation, as I can talk about this, we just need to sometimes get some inputs. Sometimes it's just a talk, sometimes it's just a picture or something. So I really would like just to encourage you really to use the social media. And on the other hand, what I see in a very concrete way, and that was the Confederal Europe where I had the privilege to work and help, is really that there needs to be very concrete people trained. I really see it on specifically on locations. As also the Jubilee principle about the nations, I really think that it's so important really to have representative in the regional and concrete state level and really to enrich this potential. And then I'm sure that the concrete people and different countries where you already are, and new countries and new regions, they are able to have their networks and spread these missions. And I really think that what is very important then, it's because it's amazing all the books, but what I am questioned myself and concerned still is like, it's no problem to read a book and understand like what you have been thinking of philosophically. But then when I come home to my homeland Slovakia, and now I would be questioned, okay, so how you are going to change your nation via the Jubilee principles, then I am concerned, okay, I need to have something more behind. Something more, what on one way it's, I think, really, as we are here Christians, really done through the Holy Spirit. But the second thing, somehow, what was really behind all your thoughts? What was really what is that principles behind? That could really, I think, help us to all other peoples who would like to be trained and understand the principles, like really then being able to spread it and being able to use it in their own regional or national context very, very concretely. So I can just say again, thank you a lot.
I think that's a great encouragement for many people here. I think thank you. Now you really have a heart at the So there we are, Moses.
Yeah. I just wondering what to say. I've known Michael since 2007. So that's almost 10 years. And almost 10 years I've been involved in this work. So the good, the bad, and ugly, I'm quite familiar, right? Right. Yeah, and so I can't say that the ideas are new, because I think for the past at least 1 year or 2 years, I would say I've been eating and living and breathing relational thinking. just keep thinking, how can we bring this into society? Because it's very nice and cozy to be here, talk about the ideas, but once you go into the marketplace, once you try to sell the idea and get people to do it, there's a whole lot of challenges. But in a sense, I'm very encouraged, having seen this movement grow for the past 8-9 years. The work that is done by Rob Lowe, he's left in relational school, has been tremendously encouraging. And also Tim Young, he has now done a lot of work with relational analytics. Now it seems more palatable, and we hope that in this coming year we will do something good with to bring relational thinking to transform companies and organizations. And today and coming this week, meeting all of you here to see that it's more interest, more people are engaged. 2 years ago we had a huge conference, many people turned up, but everyone was just coming and just trying to find out what relational thinking is all about. But today, what we have here are people who are really committed, or at least going to be committed, to do this. And we need more of you to be committed to this cause, because it's a good cause, it's a real cause, and it's worth our life to commit to it and to do something good. And I believe God is in this, and I believe God is in this, and I put my life, actually, literally my whole family, on the line just to make sure, just to see relational thinking work. So we come from an Asian society, we think that Asian society is all about relationships. It is, but relationship is also very dysfunctional in Asia and very hierarchical. And the question is, how can we transform it? And I think relational thinking is the solution. Thank you.
Moses, thank you very much. I'm going to invite Michael to step up to the podium. As he does so, if I could just say on behalf of everybody here, our appreciation to Michael, to Jonathan Tame, to others in the team, to Sally particularly, and Lizzie, and Josh, and David. Again, by naming any, I'm sure I've missed out somebody, but if we could just give them a round of applause to say thank you. Thank you.
I'd like to pick up first what Moses said as the last speaker. I think for me, this has been a wonderfully encouraging event, for the reason that Moses put his finger on, that there are so many people in this room who are perhaps on the beginning of a journey, perhaps well down the track, but have been at this conference because they really believe that relational thinking is important, and they're committed to it, and there are quite a number of people now who've actually given their lives to making this happen, and one obviously is Moses, but when I think of the amount of time that's been dedicated by Jonathan Rushworth or Robert or Tim or Gabrika, I mean, it is huge, and I can look at other people around the room. I mean, there are some friends like John Ashcroft, who's been working with me since 1988. Now, I'm not quite sure why he stayed with it for so long, except that he's a bit lazy, I think, about going out and looking for something else. but no, I think there's a serious commitment there, at least I believe there is. And now Michael Trent, since he came over and took over the RF from me, Jeremy I've worked with again since 1986, 87, trying to take these kinds of ideas into the peace building area, and he's, in a sense, been someone who's bullied me into doing more, and I've appreciated that. But I mean, just as I look around and just think about all the people who've given such a lot to this, it is just hugely humbling and encouraging, and I just want to express my appreciation to people who've put so much of their lives on the line to make this happen, and we've heard from some of them as they've spoken. I am conscious, as I think about the movement as it's developed, that probably due to my own personal bias to a significant extent, I really haven't been terribly interested in the communication side, is the honest truth. I've really focused on the research side, both in developing the ideas and a tremendous amount of time trying to think about the measurement question, because I felt it was so important. I put an enormous amount of time into that. I'm so glad Tim Young's taken so much of that off me recently. But I realise that to do communications well is also enormously time consuming. It isn't something you can just pick up and say, oh well, let's spend another 5% of our time on communication. It isn't like that. If you're going to do communications well, you've got to put a substantial block of your resources, available resources, which have been for us, as you know, very scarce, into doing that, and then over 3 to 5 or 7 years you get a payoff from that. It isn't as if you get a payoff tomorrow. But I suppose I have felt, rightly or wrongly, that if we didn't have a really solid and substantive core of thinking at the heart of this, then we could go out and do all the communication we liked. We wouldn't really change very much. It's a process where you really have to dig some deep foundations first if you're going to attack or challenge the materialism and the individualism, which are, in a sense, the two main cultural enemies that we face. You really have to dig some deep foundations. And I think we've been doing that. I've been at it for 40 years now, but I've got colleagues here, and a lot of them, you've heard them say, well, I've been at this for 10 years, you've had some saying, I've been at it for 30 years. You know, there have been people who really have put a lot of thought in, and the fact that we've got lots of books and lots of papers, at one level you might say, but no one ever reads them, it doesn't get out there. But unless you dig those foundations, the ideas in the end won't spread very far or have any lasting impact. And I'm fascinated myself. My cousin, I don't know if he's still here, Nick, is he still in the room, mentioned what happened in the Whitehall's Inn down the road 500 years ago this year. There's a notice outside the Whitehall's Inn, or where the Whitehall's Inn was, just down the road here. It's a pub today, where this group of people met and discussed Luther's ideas, and the huge transformation of British culture, Western culture, international culture in a sense, that flowed out of Luther's ideas, started with groups of people like them meeting in an inn. But then, as they developed those foundations, it then got much more into the whole communications area. And some people like Calvin were extraordinarily gifted at communication and put enormous energy into that, as well as continuing to dig the foundations. But we haven't had that particular combination of skills sitting in our office until people like Michael Trend came to join us. David Lee's always been available to help, but he's had other things he's had to do to earn a living, and it's just been a matter of how much of our available resource could we put in that direction. So I'm absolutely encouraged by the idea that we should put more into communications at this point. I think, in a sense, we've dug some foundations. It is time to push it out. I just want to come back, though, to this Cambridge point. But it isn't only, from where I'm sitting, positive influences that have gone out from Cambridge. So I'm fascinated by a place called the Orchard, which is just on the edge of Cambridge in a village called Grantchester. And a group of intellectuals used to meet in Grantchester at the Orchard, and they used to plan and ponder and move towards action in various ways in their writings and in their in the plays and music and philosophy that they were engaged in. They moved towards trying to spread a much more individualistic and I was going to say libertarian, perhaps, lifestyle. The Bloomsbury Group was well known as a huge influence. But when were they doing that? Well, between kind of 1910 and 1940 probably was their key influence. John Maynard Keynes was a part of that group. Virginia Woolf, all kinds of thinkers were in that group, and they used to meet. It was the relational proximity, if you like. They used to meet at this place on a regular basis. I think it was about once a month they would meet. Some of them probably met every week out there to keep discussing these ideas, and then they would move out from there and write their novels or write their books on philosophy or whatever else they were involved with, and out of that these ideas just kept spreading. And it was really, though, after the war, sort of 1950 onwards, that those ideas really had major impact. So you had this enormous international cataclysm in the Second World War, which completely disrupted the social order, brought women into the workforce in a major way. There were lots of positive things that came out of the war as well as the negative, but the impact of their thinking took place after 1950. Now, I think Cambridge is has huge potential as a centre for thinking, and in a sense we've exploited that through the Relationships Foundation, through the Jubilee Centre, through Cambridge Papers, through the various people who have come in and out of Cambridge, and the networks we've built out. And look down the table with Jonathan and Robert and Tim and Gabrika and Moses sitting at this end, and various. These are people who are thinking and thinking deeply, just to be able to develop some ideas that can spread more widely. Now, how and when exactly they're going to, quotes, hit the fan is not clear to me, and what exactly that mechanism might be. But I think if we go on strengthening the core of our own relationships as a community, like this group did, the subset of the Bloomsbury group that met in Cambridge, as they continue to do, the time will come when the ideas will explode. I feel confident of that. They're strong ideas, they're robust ideas, they have real impact at the level of organizations, and they potentially have the capacity to transform whole societies. And they can certainly transform individuals. And we've seen many cases of people who've come back to us and said, this has really changed the way I view life, the way I operate, the way I think about everything. So I think they will change the world. I think they will change the world. And I have also a sort of theological undergirding that helps me reflect on that as well. Because I think where they've come from is very significant. They're not just ideas that have come out of somebody's head. They have a root in this Judeo-Christian tradition, which has enormous power within itself and from where it came from. So I just want to encourage you to continue networking across with one another. The original purpose of this meeting was simply to enable people to meet each other. That was its primary purpose, to bring people together just to meet and talk, so that you would know each other, so you could be in touch with each other, so you could share ideas in a way in the world today that wasn't possible 50 years ago. But it's the building of that community among ourselves. We can't meet every month out at Grantchester, unfortunately, but would that we could, because if we could, the power of this community would be so much greater than it is when we can only meet every year or two. So the network is the key part of this meeting. There was a writer who wrote just after the Second World War and wrote a book called All Real Life is Meeting. And there is a profound truth in that, I think. So the other purposes were to introduce new ideas. I think a rooftop republic, relational cities and exploring that, chronomics and so on, new perspectives, and also to help people catch up with the work that's going on so that we all know what's happening in relational schools, or have the opportunity to find out, or in relational peace building, or in relation analytics, or whatever it may be. I think alongside the need for more communications, I've mentioned two other things. One is measurement. I'd like to see us find ways, Tim, to take the measurement out of, I want to expand it in a formal sense in organizations, and there's got to be some rigor and some professionalism about that, and your model now partnering with organizations to embed these metrics within the organizations. But without the measurement, it's really difficult to get the investment and the commitment and to get the changes. You have to be able to show that relationships in a prison or in a school or in a company are dysfunctional, and the consequences of that are extremely negative, to persuade people that this is a priority and we've got to change it. If everyone thinks the relationships are fine, then you're not going to get much action. So we've got to persuade people to measure, and we've got to find simpler and cheaper ways to do the simple, get people into this, and then we've got to get them to do the serious measurement across really large numbers of people. We've now done 10,000 student-to-student relationships in the UK. We're just about to do 11,000 student-to-student and student-to-teacher relationships in Australia. You know, I'd like to get to a point where we were measuring all the relationships among prisoners every 6 months in Scottish prisons in order to know what the quality of the relationships is among these prisoners and to find out whether our interventions are really having an impact on getting them to relate to one another as well as relating to their prison officers, for example. But I think this measurement piece is really critical, and we've got to expand it and grow it, and we've got to have lots of little stories where people have measured, well, I did a little relational measurement in my office, and this is what I found, and this is what we did, and that's a great story to go on social media because it's got some numbers to it, and people love numbers. And I think the other area that I think we really need to expand is the area of training, because we are talking about a shift of mindset. And the mindset shift needs to have with it the measurement side, I think, to make it stick and remain in people's minds. But I think we do need to expand training. And Rebecca mentioned the need for training at a national level. She wants to see training in every country across the European Union, I think. That's what you'd like to see, isn't it? Training in relational thinking in every country across the European Union to build up a cohort of people in each nation who will start to apply relational thinking in their national context. And I think that's a wonderful vision, and I would, because I feel the transforming of people, as someone has already mentioned, is through the transforming of their minds, and we do need to start with getting people to rethink how they see the world and who they are, and try and get them into another space, because we are really being oppressed increasingly by individualism, and that's why the schools work is so significant, because it is trying to take us away from the competitive individualism in the schools towards a different way of young people thinking and considering the world. And the good news is that the most successful educational system in the world is Finland. They don't work the children from 7 in the morning until 10 at night for 6 days a week. They send the children home without homework at 4:30, but they have the best educational results in the world. So how do they do that? Well, it's this cooperative understanding that's key. So I just want to say thank you very much again for coming. Next year, I think there will be a meeting of the annual General Assembly of the members somewhere in the world. The members are organizational members. I'm anticipating that we will try and run a relational thinking week, maybe move it from 4 to 5 days, be really bold. In 2019, that's what I'm thinking. We probably will hold it in Cambridge. Next year we will hold a meeting somewhere in the world for the members. But if there is pressure from all of you in the room and from elsewhere that we need to do more, Rob Lowe's already flown a kite to me and said, well, maybe next year we could run in Cambridge a sector meeting around schools. Let all the people interested in relational schools be invited to Cambridge for information, training, and so on, so they can take it back to their countries and so on. Let's do it around schools next year in Cambridge. So that's a possibility as well. If you have other ideas as to what people will come together, what they're willing to pay for, to travel, to spend the time and money, because it's an enormous cost to gather like this, I'd love to hear from you, because we need to think how to take the relational thinking network forward, not just in Cambridge, but in different parts of the world. And it may be that we need more national conferences. Thank you, guys.
Michael, thank you very much. I'd like us to show appreciation for one another for the time that we've had together, and also to honour Michael as the founder and chair of this movement, this growing movement. Shalom. Thank you very much.